The document lands on the desk of a Financial Times defense correspondent in London at 11:47 at night on the 15th of April, 2026. It is not a press release. It is not a tip from a government spokesperson. It is a 112-page tranche of leaked Iranian military operational logs, satellite tasking schedules, and orbital command transmissions, all bearing the digital signature of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. The correspondent does not sleep. By 4 in the morning London time, the story is live. By 6, the White House switchboard is overwhelmed. By 8, 3 separate emergency sessions are convening simultaneously inside the Pentagon's E-ring. And somewhere in a secure annex of U.S. Central Command's forward headquarters in Qatar, a senior Defense Intelligence Agency official reads the summary and says, out loud, to no one in particular, "They can see every single thing we have." This is the story of how a satellite the size of a transit bus, built by a Chinese commercial space firm called Earth Eye Company, launched into a low Earth sun-synchronous orbit on the 6th of June, 2024, quietly became the most dangerous intelligence asset in the Middle East. How the Islamic Republic of Iran secretly paid $36.6 million to acquire operational control of that satellite. And how, over the course of a single month, it used that eye in the sky to direct the most precisely targeted missile and drone campaign ever unleashed against United States military infrastructure. But here is what they have not told you yet. Buried deep inside that tranche, in a subsection the Financial Times has not yet published, in a file that only 3 people outside the IRGC have seen, there exists what intelligence insiders are now calling the third document, a 4th and 5th coordinate package, targets. The public leak does not name, and a shadow figure who is, as you read this, walking those coordinates through a back channel that connects Tehran to Washington, through a capital neither city is talking about publicly. His name will matter, but not yet. First, understand what is already broken into the open, because the open portion alone is enough to cause total institutional panic. The satellite is designated TE-01B by its Chinese manufacturer. Its civilian alias is Earth-I-1, or in Mandarin, Diqiu Jian-Yi. It weighs approximately 500 kilograms. It orbits at an altitude that allows it to pass over the same geographic coordinates roughly once every 97 minutes. Its panchromatic imaging system can resolve ground features at approximately 0.5 meters. To put that in plain language, it can identify an aircraft shelter, map a Patriot missile battery's exact firing position, count the refueling tankers on a tarmac, and distinguish a mobile command unit from a storage trailer, from space in real time. The IRGC Aerospace Force, which oversaw Iran's missiles, drones, and space programs, and was commanded, until U.S.-Israeli strikes killed his deputy, by Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, did not merely purchase access to images. Under the agreement brokered through the Beijing-based satellite data and control company Emposat, they purchased the software, the ground network, and the full operational command stack to run the satellite over its entire lifespan. Emposat's network of ground stations covers regions spanning Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East's near periphery. The IRGC received the ability to retask the satellite, to redirect its imaging sensors, from anywhere in the world. Former CIA analyst Jim Lamson, a senior research associate at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, did not mince words when he described what this meant operationally. Iran's own satellite ground stations had already been struck multiple times during the conflict that began on the 28th of February, 2026, the day the United States and Israel launched coordinated B-2 Spirit bomber strikes and F-35 sorties against Iranian nuclear and military facilities. Destroying a satellite ground station inside Iran is a matter of precision munitions and coordinates. But you cannot hit an Emposat relay station in Singapore, or in Sao Paulo, or in Nairobi, with a missile launched from 1,000 miles away. The IRGC had not just bought a satellite, they had bought a distributed, hardened, globally dispersed space intelligence architecture that was effectively immune to kinetic attack. Signal number 1. On the 13th of March, 2026, the TEE-01B satellite made a series of passes over Prince Sultan Air Base in the Al-Kharj region of Saudi Arabia, approximately 100 kilometers southeast of Riyadh. The logs show imaging passes on the 13th, the 14th, and again on the 15th. Time-stamped coordinate lists in the leaked document show the satellite's optical payload was tasked specifically to aircraft parking aprons, fuel depot complexes, and the hardened shelters housing U.S. Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker and KC-46 Pegasus refueling aircraft. On the 14th of March, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed publicly that American refueling aircraft stationed at Prince Sultan had been struck. 5 aircraft were damaged. The correlation between the satellite imaging schedule and the strike timing is not coincidental. It is, in the language of intelligence analysis, a confirmed pattern of pre-strike target development. But here is the catch. When the Financial Times story ran, the global media focused on Prince Sultan, on the clean, dramatic image of a scorched tarmac and the president's confirmation. That was the story they could tell with pictures. But the satellite logs do not begin or end with Prince Sultan. They encompass, in documented detail, an entire American military geography across the Middle East. The satellite surveilled Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, the principal forward staging point for U.S. Air Force operations in the Levant, monitored before and after IRGC claimed attacks in that region. It surveilled locations within visual range of the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet headquarters compound in Manama, Bahrain. It monitored Erbil International Airport in northern Iraq around the same windows as IRGC claimed drone attacks. It imaged Camp Buehring and Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait. It surveilled Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, the United States' only permanent military base on the African continent, the hub of all counterterrorism and rapid response operations for the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. It mapped the Khor Fakkan container port area and the Kidva power and desalination plant in the United Arab Emirates. It tracked the Alba aluminium smelting facility in Bahrain, one of the world's largest such installations, and a facility whose destruction would knock out a significant fraction of Gulf industrial capacity overnight. The IRGC was not targeting military assets alone. They were building a comprehensive map of every pressure point in the Western-aligned Gulf architecture, every vulnerability, every choke point, every node that, if struck, would send markets into freefall and civilians into darkness. Now understand the weapon that was doing the actual striking, because the satellite alone does not kill anything. What kills is what comes after the satellite. On the 10th of March, 2026, a senior IRGC commander issued a public statement confirming that Iran was shifting strike doctrine. Iran would no longer deploy swarms of lighter munitions designed to saturate air defenses through sheer volume. Going forward, the IRGC would fire only missiles carrying warheads of 1,000 kilograms or more. The AFP wire service called this the most intense and heaviest barrage since the conflict began. Intelligence analysts in Washington called it something else, a deliberate decision to shift from quantity to quality, from attrition to decapitation. The weapon driving that shift was the Fatah II. Iran's Fatah II, the name translates roughly as Conqueror, is a hypersonic boost glide missile with an advertised range of 1,500 kilometers and a terminal velocity approaching Mach 15. The IRGC had claimed early in the conflict to have struck the USS Abraham Lincoln, the Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, CVN-72, operating in the Arabian Sea, with 4 ballistic missiles. The U.S. Central Command denied the claim flatly and immediately. The Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launched didn't even come close, CENTCOM stated. The Lincoln continued flight operations in support of CENTCOM's campaign, but the claim itself, and the imagery that accompanied it, revealed something more important than whether the missiles connected. It revealed that the IRGC Aerospace Force had firing solutions for the carrier, that they knew its approximate position, and that they had the Fatah II's targeting parameters, programmed to intersect with coordinates in the Abraham Lincoln's operational area. The satellite had given them the grid. The Fatah II had been pointed at the grid. What stood between the Abraham Lincoln and a catastrophic strike was the SM-6 interceptor, the Aegis combat system, and the carrier's ability to travel at 25 knots in an unpredictable pattern. That margin is not comfortable. That margin does not let anyone in the E-ring sleep well. But here's the catch. Again, a different catch this time. The IRGC hardliners, and this is what Trump himself acknowledged publicly in a social media post on the 23rd of April, are not the same as the Iranian government officials conducting ceasefire negotiations. Trump wrote, with characteristic bluntness, Iran is having a very hard time figuring out who their leader is. The infighting is between the hardliners, who have been losing badly on the battlefield, and the moderates, who are not very moderate at all, is crazy. Read that again. The sitting president of the United States is describing in a public post a fractured command structure inside a nation he is simultaneously fighting and negotiating with. The hardliners are IRGC generals and Revolutionary Guard ideologues who believe the satellite activation, the Fatah II program, the Emposat ground network, all of it constitutes proof that Iran can fight the United States to a standstill. And a standstill, in their worldview, is victory. They do not want a deal. They want to drag the conflict past the point of U.S. domestic tolerance. They want oil at $200 per barrel. They want the Western coalition to fracture under economic pressure. They want the ceasefire to expire. And then they want to demonstrate that Iran's Plan B, the satellite-guided precision strike architecture, can reach any American base in the theater. The man trying to stop them from doing exactly that is Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. But Araghchi does not control the IRGC. Nobody in the nominal civilian government of Iran controls the IRGC. Not now. Not since the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on the first day of the war, the 28th of February. Not since Ali Larijani, who had been a key figure in the back-channel negotiation pipeline, was killed in the same opening strike package. The Islamic Republic is conducting its foreign policy through a man who is effectively operating without a chain of command that reaches the people with their fingers on the launch controls. This brings us to Russia, and to the layer of the story that most Western analysis has substantially undercounted. What Russia has done for Iran in this conflict is not simply provide weapons. Russia has provided Iran with an intelligence architecture that predates and complements the TE-01B satellite by months. The Russian Kayam satellite, formerly designated Canopus Vai in its original Russian commercial role, but re-registered under the Iranian name Kayam after its transfer in the summer of 2022, has been providing IRGC missile planners with imagery of both U.S. and Israeli targets since the opening days of the war. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi acknowledged Moscow's military cooperation with Tehran in terms that bordered on confirmation. He called it simply good. His measured word implied volumes. Russia was also feeding Iran data from the Resonance NE radar complex, a long-range, over-the-horizon radar system designed to detect and track stealth aircraft, meaning the very F-35s and B-2 Spirits that had been the tip of the American strike spear since February 28th. But the Shahed drone pipeline is where the Russia-Iran relationship reveals itself as something unprecedented in modern military history. Iran developed the Shahed 136, a loitering munition, more accurately, a one-way attack drone, during the years of sanctions. Russia first purchased them in quantity for use in Ukraine. Then, Russia began manufacturing its own version domestically at the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in the Republic of Tatarstan, a dedicated facility that by 2026 had grown into one of the largest drone production complexes in the world. And then something strange and strategically significant began to happen. Components from the Russian production line began flowing back to Iran. What had started as an Iranian export to Russia had become a self-sustaining bidirectional production loop, a loop that sanctions, blockades, and secondary tariffs have so far been completely unable to break. Both nations supply and consume from the same system. Both nations are isolated from Western arms markets. Both nations are simultaneously sharing a manufacturing base. When the United States imposes new sanctions on Iranian weapons procurement, they are sanctioning a supply chain that runs through Russian special economic zones inside the Russian Federation. The mechanism of interdiction that works against a conventional arms importer does not work against a co-producer. The HQ-9B dimension of the air defense layering is equally critical. In July of 2025, weeks after the 12-day Israeli airstrike campaign that temporarily degraded Iran's missile infrastructure, Beijing transferred Chinese HQ-9B surface-to-air missile batteries to Tehran. The HQ-9B is China's premier long-range air defense system, analogous in function to the Russian S-400 Triumph, but with a manufacturing and logistics chain that runs entirely through Chinese state-owned defense enterprises. Beijing could resupply its components without triggering the same interdiction mechanisms that the United States had constructed around Russian arms transfers. 4 Russian-built S-300 air defense batteries, acquired by Iran in 2016 and forming the original backbone of Iranian strategic air defense, were redeployed in February of 2026, after years in reserve, activated specifically in anticipation of the U.S.-Israeli strike campaign that began on the 28th, combined with the HQ-9B batteries, with the Resonance NE radar's ability to track stealth aircraft, and with what Brigadier General Hajizade's Aerospace Force was receiving from the TE-01B satellite about incoming strike packages, Iran's integrated air defense network was significantly more capable than U.S. planners had assessed. Not capable enough to stop everything, but capable enough to impose costs that nobody at the Pentagon was comfortable acknowledging publicly. And the Verba systems. December of 2025, Iran finalized a deal for the Russian 9K-333 Verba shoulder-fired missile air defense system, 500 launch units, and 2,509 M336 missiles. Man-portable, dispersible, concealable, impossible to destroy from the air unless you know precisely where every operator is standing. By February of 2026, these systems had reportedly been deployed. 500 soldiers or guerrillas with Verba launchers, scattered across Iran's mountain and coastal topography, represents an air defense layer that no strike package can simply erase. No satellite can pre-locate 500 humans. No Tomahawk can preempt a weapon that fits in a backpack. The hardliners inside the IRGC are banking on this. Each Verba unit represents a tax on any future American air campaign. The bill keeps rising, but here's the catch. Russia is not simply Iran's patron. Russia is also quietly playing a longer game. Moscow's hawks, the Gerasimov-era defense establishment figures who wanted maximum cost imposed on the United States, pushed the weapons transfers hard. But Russia's foreign policy establishment, which is watching oil prices and its own economic exposure, is simultaneously using the Iran conflict to extract concessions from Washington on Ukraine. This is the friction between rooms that no official will acknowledge publicly. On the encrypted back channels between Moscow and Washington, American negotiators have been told, not directly, but in the language of diplomatic suggestion, that Russian restraint on Iran weapons transfers could be linked to NATO posture adjustments in Eastern Europe. This is shadow diplomacy in its most operationally dangerous form, Russia using Iranian blood and American treasure to rewrite a European security architecture. The messenger carrying that particular file, the document outlining what Russia wants in exchange for what it will not send to Tehran, is a senior official from a Central Asian government that has maintained embassies in both Moscow and Washington throughout the conflict. His identity is not publicly known, but he has been in Vienna, then Tashkent, then Washington in the last 14 days. The third document is not the only thing in circulation. China's role, however, is where the architecture becomes genuinely global in its implications. The TEE-01B satellite is a Chinese product operated by a Chinese commercial company, Emposat, through a Chinese ground station network, using data routing that passes through Chinese telecommunications infrastructure. Beijing calls it a commercial transaction. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian called the Financial Times story purely fabricated. The Chinese embassy in Washington said Beijing firmly opposes relevant parties spreading speculative and insinuative disinformation against China. Liu Pengyu, the embassy spokesperson, added that China upholds an objective and impartial stance and never engages in actions that escalate conflicts. Now, these statements were issued within hours of a Reuters query. They did not explain the Mizar Vision data. Mizar Vision is a Chinese geospatial intelligence firm. Its connections to the People's Liberation Army are a matter of ongoing investigation by the China Economic and Security Review Commission. In early April of 2026, intelligence assessments confirmed that Mizar Vision had published on an open-source platform artificial intelligence-enhanced satellite imagery, specifically identifying Patriot missile battery positions, THAAD system deployments, aircraft shelter configurations, fuel depot locations, command center positions, and logistical infrastructure, all at U.S. bases across the Middle East, not raw satellite data. Processed, analyzed, annotated, prioritized intelligence. A Defense Intelligence Agency official described the activity in unambiguous terms. A Chinese company, we believe maliciously, providing intelligence on an open-source platform, directly increasing lethal risk to American personnel. Mizar Vision had published at least 6 detailed analytical posts, specifically concerning Prince Sultan Air Base in late February of 2026, weeks before the satellite imaging passes that preceded the March 14th strike. Signal number 2. A separate Pentagon intelligence source concluded that multiple military capabilities identified within Mizar Vision imagery subsequently appeared among targets struck during the latest phase of the conflict. The timing between imagery publication and subsequent IRGC missile strikes was not random. It was operational. China's second firm linked to this architecture, Jing'an Technology, also connected to PLA networks, had been marketing geospatial intelligence on the positions and movements of U.S. forces in the region. Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, China's most advanced chipmaker, was formally accused in March 2026 of providing chip-making tools to Iran's military. In April, the United States sanctioned the Hengli Petrochemical Dalian Refinery Company Limited, one of China's largest independent teapot oil refineries, for processing Iranian crude oil in violation of U.S. sanctions. Beijing's response to that sanction was a threat of countermeasures. And on the 11th of April, CNN reported, citing U.S. intelligence sources, that China was preparing to ship FN-6 man-portable air defense systems to Iran through third countries. These are shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, the same category of weapon as the Verba. 500 launchers in the hands of IRGC paramilitaries, dispersed across difficult terrain, operating under Chinese Beidou navigation receivers embedded in Iranian Shahed drone guidance systems. This is not a proxy force. This is a fully integrated multi-domain military architecture underwritten by 2 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Trump's warning to Beijing that China would face big problems if it carried through with weapons shipments was issued at the weekend. By Tuesday, the intelligence assessment said the shipments were proceeding. But here is the catch. China is not doing this from ideology. China is doing this from interest. The People's Republic is the largest buyer of Iranian oil, purchasing over 80% of Iran's shipped crude in 2025. But the Strait of Hormuz conflict is also, simultaneously, a catastrophic threat to China's own energy supply lines. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil transit the strait daily under normal conditions. Since the IRGC began its mine-laying campaign and fast attack boat operations in late February, that number has collapsed. The Guardian characterized the current situation as a dual blockade. The U.S. Navy successfully blockading Iranian ports while failing to reopen the strait to tanker traffic. Trump claimed on the 23rd of April that the United States fully controlled the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM's clarification revealed the more complex truth. The blockade applied only to ships transiting toward Iranian ports. The IRGC's minefields and attack boat capability remained an effective deterrent against commercial tanker transit in the other direction. Brent crude, which was trading at $91 per barrel the week before February 28th, had spiked to $147 within 3 weeks of the conflict's opening. Insurance premiums for tanker passage through the Gulf had become prohibitive. If the strait remains functionally closed for another 30 days, independent analysts at the Tokyo-based Energy Economics and Society Research Institute project a price of $200 per barrel. At $200 a barrel, the European Union enters a recession. The United States GDP contracts by at least 1.8%. Emerging market sovereign debt becomes unserviceable. China, whose economic expansion depends on cheap energy, does not win in that scenario either. Beijing is arming Iran with one hand while using the other to quietly press Tehran through the Pakistani diplomatic channel to accept a framework that keeps crude flowing. This is not contradiction. This is calibrated leverage, the secret offer. Pakistan's role in this architecture has been systematically underreported because it is simultaneously the most important and the most politically inconvenient piece of the puzzle. Pakistan brokered the 2-week ceasefire that took effect on the 7th of April. China provided, according to the New York Times, the political weight and strategic backing that convinced Iranian leaders to accept Pakistan's framework. Pakistan's role was the practical channel. China's role was the guarantee. The ceasefire paused the kinetic phase of the conflict. It did not stop the satellite. The TEE-01B satellite continued its imaging passes over U.S. bases during the ceasefire period. This is documented in the leaked operational logs. The IRGC Aerospace Force continued receiving daily intelligence products from the Emposat ground network while Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi sat across a table from U.S.COM Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Islamabad. The talks lasted 21 hours. J.D. Vance emerged and announced that no agreement had been reached. Iran had refused, in Vance's words, to accept our terms. Trump subsequently announced that he no longer cared about negotiations and declared a U.S. naval blockade of the strait effective the 13th of April. When Witkoff and Kushner were scheduled for a follow-up trip to Islamabad, Trump canceled the visit, calling it time-wasting, what they are saying behind closed doors. The real breakdown in Islamabad was not about enrichment percentages or warhead stockpiles. Those were the stated positions. The real breakdown was about the satellite. The U.S. negotiating team had, by the 11th of April, received partial intelligence on the TE-01B system's operational role. They had the Mazar Vision analysis. They had the signal intelligence from Emposat's data routing. They knew Iran was being watched over by a Chinese eye that the United States could not blind, could not jam, and could not destroy without committing an act of war against a People's Liberation Army-connected commercial entity operating from sovereign Chinese territory. What Washington demanded, in back-channel terms, Araghchi could relay, but not promise to deliver, the shutdown of the Emposat tasking arrangement, the termination of the IRGC's operational control of TEE-01B, the return of the satellite to purely civilian commercial management. Araghchi could not deliver that, because Araghchi does not control the IRGC, because the hardliners, Brigadier General Hajizade's faction and the men below him who have been directing missile strikes and satellite tasking simultaneously, view the TE-01B arrangement as their most valuable surviving strategic asset. It is the one thing the B-2 Spirit bombers cannot touch. It is the architecture of Plan B. And now, at last, we arrive at the third document. The leaked tranche published by the Financial Times on the 15th of April contained 112 pages. Those pages covered Prince Sultan, Muwafaq Salti, Manama, Erbil, Camp Buering, Ali El Salem, Camp Lemonnier, Duqm, the Khor-Fakkan port, the Kidva desalination plant, the Alba smelter. That was the published portion. What the FT did not publish, what was withheld from the public portion of the leak, was a separate subsection, Operational Tasking Annex 4 Charlie. Inside that annex, the TEE-01B satellite's imaging log includes 2 additional target coordinate packages. The first is a set of near real-time positional updates for the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, not its general operating area in the Arabian Sea, not an approximate grid square, specific latitude and longitude coordinates updated at intervals of approximately 97 minutes, align precisely with the satellite's orbital period. The IRGC Aerospace Force had been tracking the Abraham Lincoln continuously. The carrier's anti-deception maneuvering, its emission control protocols, its flight deck operational patterns, all of it was being fed into the FATA-2's pre-launch targeting database. The second coordinate package in Annex 4, Charlie covers a category of target that the public leak entirely omitted: the forward-deployed elements of U.S. nuclear command and control infrastructure in the theater, hardened communication relay nodes, TACAMO, take charge and move out, aircraft operating patterns, the antenna arrays that connect forward-deployed commanders to the National Command Authority in Washington. The IRGC was not just building a list of bases to strike in a second round of combat, they were building a doctrine for strategic decapitation, for severing the command links between American military units in the theater and the chain of command that authorizes their most consequential responses. And the shadow figure, the man who's been carrying this document through the back channel from Tehran toward Washington, through an Omani intermediary whose identity has been known to 3 intelligence services since the 21st of April, is a former IRGC signals intelligence officer who defected 18 months ago and has been living under protected status in a European capital. His codename inside the intelligence community is known. His real name is not being printed yet, but he walked into a meeting in Muscat on the 24th of April, 2026, carrying a physical copy of Annex 4 Charlie and a message from the IRGC faction that produced it. The message was not a threat. The message was a price list. The IRGC hardliners, the men who activated Plan B, who tasked the satellite, who built the FATA-2 targeting solutions for the Abraham Lincoln, were offering to shut it down, for a price that no one in Washington has yet agreed to pay, and that no one in Beijing wants Washington to accept. Now you understand the full geometry of this crisis. The next 72 hours lead to only 2 paths. There's no third road, there's no gradual off-ramp, there's no managed de-escalation that splits the difference. The first path is total breakthrough. The Shadow Figures document reaches the right desk in Washington. Not the State Department's desk, not the NSC's desk, but the desk of a decision maker with enough authority and enough flexibility to engage the price list directly and separately from the public ceasefire negotiation. In parallel, China, recognizing that a $200 per barrel oil market destroys its own export engine as surely as it breaks the Western consumer economy, uses its position as Iran's primary crude buyer to apply the kind of economic leverage that no American threat can replicate. Beijing tells Tehran, not publicly, not through any channel that leaves a record, that the 25-year strategic partnership signed in 2021 does not extend to nuclear confrontation, does not extend to the decapitation of American command architecture, and does not extend past the point where Iranian actions trigger a U.S. military escalation that closes the strait permanently. Pakistan holds the ceasefire framework together long enough for the back channel to produce a document, not the third document, not Annex 4 Charlie, but a fourth document, a secret codex, that maps a path to a nuclear deal framework and the deactivation of the TEE-01B military tasking arrangement. The strait reopens. Brent crude falls $60 in a week. The Abraham Lincoln remains afloat and unscratched. The IRGC hardliners are outmaneuvered by their own government's economic desperation. History records it as the most dangerous week no one fully understood until it was over. The second path is total kinetic collapse. The hardliners inside the IRGC, calculating that the Annex 4 Charlie leak itself has destroyed any prospect of a face-saving deal, that Washington will never accept their price list, and that the window for demonstrating Plan B's full capability is closing, authorize a second satellite-guided strike package, not against Prince Sultan, not against Muwafaq Salti, against a target whose destruction crosses a threshold that triggers automatic U.S. escalation protocols. The FATA-2 targeting data for the Abraham Lincoln, already loaded, is released. The SM-6 battery aboard the Lincoln's escort destroyers, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers operating in its carrier strike group, intercept some of the incoming missiles. Some, not all. Because the satellite has been tracking the exact position of those destroyers too. Because the Emposat ground network has been feeding the IRGC not just images of fixed bases, but updated maritime surveillance data. If even one FATA-2 warhead, carrying 1,000 kilograms of high explosive, connects with an American carrier strike group vessel, the United States is no longer in a conflict with Iran. It is in a war with the entire axis of upheaval, because the satellite that guided that missile was Chinese, the navigation receiver that refined its course was Beidou, and the intelligence that placed the Abraham Lincoln in the target package was produced by a company with documented People's Liberation Army connections. Oil hits $200 that same day. The Western economy fractures along its fault lines before the smoke clears. China faces 50% tariffs, then secondary sanctions, then something far worse than tariffs. Russia, watching its leverage evaporate as Washington suspends every diplomatic channel simultaneously, loses the one thing it has been maneuvering to protect, its ability to negotiate a European settlement while the United States is distracted. And Iran, the Iran that the hardliners believe they are saving, ceases to exist as a functioning state within 90 days. 2 paths, 72 hours. The shadow figure is in Muscat. The third document is in his briefcase. The USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, is making 25 knots in an unpredictable pattern somewhere in the Arabian Sea, and the satellite passes overhead every 97 minutes. What happens next is not yet written. But the men who will write it, in Tehran, in Washington, in Beijing, in Moscow, in Islamabad, in Muscat, are already in the room. The door is still open, barely, and the clock is running.